Assalamu alaikum. This is Hena Zuberi, and you're watching Muslim Network News. Our top story tonight is on the Supreme Court agreeing to take a case by 3 American Muslims against the FBI. Lawyers for Sheikh Yasser Fazagha and 2 other Muslim men are suing the FBI for violating their religious freedom. They say that the FBI targeted them because of their religion. They're also arguing that the FBI unlawfully used an informant to gather information about Muslims in their county. A district court has dismissed the claims under the secret government privilege. The Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, however, reversed the lower court's decision. Now the U.S. government is asking the Supreme Court justices to review the appeals court decision. This is to protect sensitive national security information and to keep its promises to foreign allies. An FBI agent spent a year in Orange County, California mosque in 2006 collecting information about Muslims. FBI agents have been infiltrating mosques around the country since the 1930s. The surveillance intensified after the September 11, 2001 attacks ushered in the war on terror. No American Muslims, Afghans, or Iraqis were involved in the terror attacks of 9/11. More guns are being purchased in the United States than ever before, and a new ruling from the country's most populous state last week will likely increase that number. Last Friday, federal judge Roger Benitez threw out California's ban on assault weapons. The 3-decade-old law covered semi-automatic rifles, including the AR-15. This weapon has been used in 11 mass shootings in the U.S. since 2012. Judge Benitez wrote that the California assault weapons ban disrespects freedom. Gun ownership has been steadily rising across America. The FBI conducted over 4 million background checks for gun purchases in June last year. That is the highest record in 20 years since the agency started keeping track. Almost 40% of the background checks were those of first-time gun owners. United States President Joe Biden's global minimum tax for corporates has crossed a major milestone. G7's finance ministers agreed to back the 15% minimum tax for multinational companies. This also means that these corporations would pay tax in the country they generate sales and not just where they have a physical presence. UK Finance Minister Rishi Sunak called it a historic agreement to reform the global tax system. He also said it was crucial so that right companies pay the right taxes in the right places. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said this was aimed at preventing companies from avoiding taxes by shifting profits overseas. The reform would largely affect tech giants like Google, Facebook, and Apple. A spokesperson from Google said they hoped a balanced and durable agreement will be finalized soon. A statement from Amazon said that this would create a multilateral solution and bring stability to the international tax system. At least $1.4 billion of Biden's economic revival and infrastructure plans are dependent on funding from this overhaul. The agreement marks a significant win for his administration ahead of next week's G7 summit in Cornwall in the United Kingdom. President Joe Biden reached out to his former boss to assist and encourage Americans to sign up for Obamacare. This was to highlight the August 15th deadline for expanded enrollment in the program. According to a Health and Human Services report, 31 million Americans have obtained coverage in 2021. The report also stated that over 11 million people are covered in places where subsidized private plans are offered. Expanded Medicaid brought in additional 14.8 million people under coverage. With the exception of a dozen states, all have accepted Obamacare's Medicaid expansion, which mainly serves low-income working adults. Larry Levitt, an executive at the Kaiser Family Foundation, said that the law broke down barriers to enrollment. Governor Gavin Newsom said his state will hand out more than $116 million in cash prizes. California has implemented a vaccine-based lottery program called Vax for the Win. This will be available to residents who get vaccinated before the state's June 15th reopening. He said the program offers 3 levels of rewards, including prizes of up to $1.5 million. The program is similar to efforts across other states, with Ohio, New York, Maryland, or Oregon, Colorado also offering incentives. But despite the incentives offered, New York has seen a 55% decline in vaccinations. However, Ohio's Vax-A-Million program reported a 28% jump after it began, the best results in the country. With an investment of $100 million, the University of Virginia is planning to build a new democracy center. The Karsh Institute of Democracy will be a nonpartisan institute dedicated to the study, teaching, and promotion of democracy. The building is expected to be completed by 2026. However, the center will operate and provide programming prior to that. The center was made possible by a $50 million gift from alumni Martha and Bruce Karsh. The Karshes said for a healthy democracy, its principles, institutions, and processes must be studied, understood, and protected. Melody Barnes will serve as the Institute's inaugural executive director. She was the director of the White House Domestic Policy Council under former President Barack Obama. In international news, Burmese forces hunt down villagers in the Delta region. Media reports 20 dead. Local news agencies said 20 civilians have been murdered and more wounded during a search for weapons in the Ayeyarwady River Delta. They were killed by Burmese security forces. They said villagers had tried to fight back with catapults and crossbows after soldiers assaulted residents. The activist group Assistance Association for Political Prisoners reports that over 800 people have been killed by the army and police since February 1st. This was when the army overthrew the elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi. A meeting between junta leader Min Aung Hlaing and envoys from the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, drew anger from the public. As a result, protesters in the city of Mandalay burnt the ASEAN flag. Palestinian siblings and social media activists Mona and Mohammed Al-Kurd were arrested by Israeli police this weekend. The pair have been at the forefront of protests against the expulsion of Palestinians from occupied East Jerusalem neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. They were released from captivity after several hours of detention. In a statement, they said no number of arrests by Israel will terrorize or frighten them. They emphasized that they will defend their home and the land they were born and raised on. According to the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, 10 people were injured in protests calling for the release of the Al-Kurds. Israeli forces fired rubber bullets and stain grenades at protesters. This came a day after Al Jazeera journalist Gavera Bolderi was arrested after covering a demonstration in Sheikh Jarrah. Her arrest drew global condemnation. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called a newly formed Israeli coalition the greatest election fraud in the history of democracy. In response, Naftali Bennett, who is set to replace him, said, "People are allowed to establish a government even if Netanyahu is not heading it." Bennett leads the far-right Yamina party and advocates annexation of parts of the occupied West Bank. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres condemned the heinous attack in the village of Solhan in Burkina Faso, where 3 mass graves were discovered. He called on the international community to redouble its efforts against violent extremism. He called on member states to deal with the unacceptable human toll resulting from such violence. The latest attack was directed against the Volunteers for the Defense of the Motherland, or VDP. This is a civilian defense force set up in 2019 that works alongside the National Army of Burkina Faso. Since its inception, the VDP has suffered 200 fatalities in its fight against extremist groups. The attacks on Solhan is similar to other recent attacks within the Sahel region. This includes an attack in March in neighboring Niger, which claimed 137 lives. Since January, fatalities resulting from violence has estimated to be more than 500. More attacks are expected to be carried out within the Sahel region. However, neighboring countries in the tri-border area of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are also in increased risk from the threat of such violence. The French army is assisting the government forces. Jeff Bezos will be going to space on July 20th, and he will do that on his own rocket ship. His space company, Blue Origin, is set to fly in just 15 days. In an Instagram post, Bezos said he had dreamed of traveling to space since he was 5 years old. Perhaps this is why the date of the flight is also significant. July 20th is the 52nd anniversary of the first moon landing. American astronauts Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin became the first humans ever to land on the moon. Bezos was 5 years old at that date. He'll be traveling with his brother Mark in a 6-seater capsule. In an 11-minute flight, he will reach 60 miles above Earth. British business magnate Richard Branson of Virgin Atlantic plans to do the same later this year. For Palestinians, the experience of being a prisoner is a way of life. 40% of all male adults in the occupied West Bank and Gaza have been detained by Israel. More details in this report by Ali Khalaf.
Around 1 million Palestinians have been arrested by Israeli forces since 1967. This includes 17,000 women and girls and 50,000 children. The Palestinian Commission of Detainees and Ex-Detainees Affairs has issued this report. It says that more than 54,000 administrative detention orders were recorded. The policy of administrative detention allows Israelis to extend the detention of a prisoner without charge or trial. 226 detainees have died inside Israeli prisons since experiencing some form of torture and abuse. An estimated 4,500 Palestinians are believed to be held in Israeli prisons currently. The current prisoners include 41 women and 140 minors.
Many of us grew up reading or watching The Little House on the Prairie. There was one girl from the cast who survived. Rose was her name. She grew up to become an icon of libertarianism in America. She also has something interesting to say about Muslims and the United States. Ali Khalaf and Saleha Farouk explore that in this report.
Americans speak Arabic when they say sugar, coffee, sherbet, and gypsum, or when they say mattress, sofa, cotton, and talcum. The streets Americans pave and the houses Americans furnish were created by Muslims. Rose Wilder Lane, in her book, The Discovery of Freedom, has a long list of things that came from Muslims to America. She included beds, bed linens, and tables as Muslim inventions. She also attributes strawberries and ice cream to Muslims as well. If you wonder how these things came to America and who brought them here, her answer is the Crusaders. Yes, the Crusaders. The Crusaders were wild European Christians of the Middle Ages. They slaughtered Muslims in the Holy Lands. However, they eventually learned a bit from Muslims as well. And when they returned home in Europe, they brought back with them some luxuries of life. When these Europeans came to what they thought was the New World, they brought a bit of that culture with them.
Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse, walk a mile in my shoes.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Welcome back. The UN's team was visiting Bhasan Char Island, where Rohingya Muslim refugees were recently transferred by Bangladesh. Refugees claim they were beaten by the Bangladeshi police to prevent them from talking to the United Nations. Refugees have complained about living conditions on the remote island. To discuss more about these living conditions, let's go to Saleha Farouk. She's in discussion with Imran Mohammed, the Burma Task Force Program Associate. Over to you, Saleha.
Thank you and much appreciated. Today we're very happy to be joined by Imran Mohammed Fazal Haq, who is a human rights activist with the Special Burma Task Force from US-based Justice for All human rights organization. Thank you so much, Mohammed, Imran, for being here with us today.
Thank you, everyone. It's an honor to be here.
Our pleasure. I wanted to first ask you about when we're looking at the Indonesian example and thinking about how Rohingya refugees regularly flee the Bangladeshi camps for a nearby country, what are the potential risk factors in this journey when they flee the camps?
Well, we can start from the boat journeys because, we have to understand the core problem. So we are Rohingya and we are stateless. So we don't have any papers to travel by plane. So we have to travel by boat. There is no alternative. So there Rohingya people are facing so many challenges in the camp, and they are making this journey because they cannot cope with the difficulties that they are facing in the camp. And when they travel by boat from Bangladesh to Indonesia, it's like they are taking their lives in their hands. They can die, and it's almost certain that they can die. But sometimes they get lucky and they survive and they make it to Indonesia. And when they make it to Indonesia, there are many other problems that they don't think when they start traveling. Like I was in Indonesia. I was in Malaysia. I wanted to go to Australia, and then I made the journey by boat from Malaysia to Indonesia. When I was in Indonesia, I got arrested by the Indonesian police, and I was detained there for 2 years. And I received my refugee status when I was there, and I was released in the community. But in the community, as a refugee, I was not allowed to work. I was not allowed to get an education. So when Rohingya refugees are in Indonesia, they will be stuck there forever, like they were in Bangladesh, because I know the situation in the camp is very different because there are a lot of people and it's very crowded. But in Indonesia, in the community, the situation would be different, but still they won't have anything to survive on a daily basis. Like they can't work, they can't study, so they are still in the same situation.
Now, several reports have showed us that approximately 15,000 Rohingya were trafficked from 2019 to 2020, and most of them were women and children. What are the factors or the reasons driving Rohingya communities out of the camp in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh?
Well, we know that there are nearly 1 million Rohingya refugees who are living in the Bangladesh camp, and they are facing enormous challenges. Like there are nearly 500,000 children who are growing up without education, and they can't work, they can't get an education, and also there are so many young women who are there with no opportunities in their little tents, and all these factors are driving them to leave the camp because they just can't bear with it. There was before the military coup, there was a discussion about sending the refugees back to Myanmar, but it's not on the table at the moment, and no one is talking about it. So their future is extremely uncertain, and they don't know what's going to happen and when their lives will change. So they can't see a future. That's why they are leaving the camp to find a future in Malaysia, in Indonesia, or in other countries.
You already spoke a little bit about your own refugee experience, but we'd like to dive into that a little bit more today. Now, speaking about your own experience, what is the likelihood that Rohingya refugees actually end up in a safe country after running away from the camps or running away from the Bhasan Char island?
There are many refugees from many different countries, but the Rohingyas situation is very different, because when I was in the camp, like I was in Indonesia, I was in Bangladesh, I was in Australia, and also in Australia's offshore camp on Manus Island in Papua New Guinea for 5 years. So I spent almost more than 7 years in detention centers. The refugees who are coming from other countries, they have an opportunity to go back to their home countries, even though their situation is not ideal, but they can still go back. They have an opportunity. They are not stateless. They have a passport or they have papers from their own country. But with the Rohingya population, they are stateless. So if something goes wrong, they can be stuck in the camp for their whole life. So, and I have seen many refugees who made mistakes, and they didn't receive their refugee status, and they have been stuck in refugee camps forever. And if they want to go back to Myanmar, they can't, because they are stateless and they are not accepted by the Myanmar's government. So the situation is very complicated for the Rohingya people population. And also, when the third countries are looking for refugees to resettle in their home countries, they are looking for refugees who are educated and so many backgrounds. They are checking all these facts. But with the Rohingya population, they don't have any backgrounds. It's not their fault. It's the Myanmar's government fault, because we have been persecuted for decades. We were not allowed to go to school. We were not allowed to participate in the political platform. So we don't have any background. It's not our fault. It's Myanmar's fault. But the international community needs to focus on the Rohingya from a different perspective. If they don't, then they will be stuck in the camps forever. They need an opportunity, and the international community needs to provide that opportunity and platform so that Rohingya population can grow and participate and contribute to this world.
Thank you for that. Now, since the creation of the Bhasan Char Island, around 18,000 Rohingya have been moved there from Cox's Bazar camps. In your perspective, has the Bangladeshi government adequately responded to the needs and the wants of Rohingya community currently living in Bangladesh as they are being moved to the island?
It's a very complicated issue. And I think, the answer should be answered by one of the refugees who is currently living in the camp. But from my perspective, I think, Bangladesh is not in a position to deal with the crisis, because, they have their own issues. It's a poor country. And I think, the international community needs to provide support so that, the Bangladesh government can deal with the problem. In Bhasan Char, there are so many refugees, and now their future is even darker, because when they were in the camp, they had some sort of hope that they would be able to go back to Myanmar, and across the river they could see their country, they could see their state. I think it gave them some hope that one day they would be able to go back to Myanmar. But now they are in Bhasan Char. Their needs are not met, and we don't have adequate communication with the refugees. So it's very complicated, and I don't think it's transferring refugees from the Bangladesh camp to Bhasan Char is not a solution. It's a temporary solution. And with the Australian government, that they created an offshore detention center, and it created so many other problems. And I feel like it's Bangladesh government is going to face all these problems, because they are not finding a solution, a permanent solution. It's a temporary solution. And when they are responding to a crisis with a temporary solution, they will face other issues. And I think that's what is happening at the moment in the camp in Bhasan Char.
We're currently speaking about Rohingya refugees, but I wanted to shift focus a little bit about Rohingya that might still be in their Rakhine State region, and that might be populations at risk right now. Of course, we know that the Myanmar government has, the military rather, has taken over through a military coup, and unfortunately, the lives of local Burmese individuals have been lost in the hundreds range. With Rohingya in Rakhine being such a vulnerable community, how does the violence of the army potentially risk the safety and the security of Rohingya who are still in their country? And is this perhaps causing them to flee in the same way that Rohingya from Bangladesh are fleeing that area?
I believe, I've been in touch with some of the refugees who are still in our current state. I think they are not clear about their future. I mean, we have never been clear about our future because of the constitution, because the new citizenship law of 1982, which excluded Rohingya people from getting a citizenship from Myanmar. So we still have the same constitution. We are still excluded. We were born in Myanmar. Myanmar is our country, but we don't have citizenship from Myanmar. And the military coup came back again. I mean, there are so many communities who are fighting for democracy, and and we have been participating in the virtual protests and also physical protests. There are many Rohingyas who are living in the capital city of Yangon. But what is the future of Rohingya? Where are we at the moment? We are still excluded. If they don't change the constitution, then we are not part of Myanmar, and that needs to be changed. And because all of our work is not recognized, we are still excluded. So the international community needs to focus on changing the constitution, and we need to be included in the constitution. And then we need our citizenship. And those who are still in our current state, they are extremely vulnerable because they don't know what's going to happen, because anything can happen to them anytime. And the international community and we don't have access to the place, and we can't communicate with the refugees who are still in our current state on a daily basis. So they are extremely vulnerable, and we don't have enough information about their situation. And I believe, they will have to leave. They will be forced to leave. They don't want to leave their home country, but they will be forced. Like, nearly 1 million refugees who are currently living in Bangladesh. They didn't want to leave their country, but they were forced.
Thank you so much. We're here with Imran Mohammed Fazal Haq, who is a human rights activist with the Special Burma Task Force. Imran, thank you so much for your presence and for your courage to speak with today. We're quite happy and honored to be joined by you.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Back to Hena in the news studio.
Thank you, Saleha. Before moving on to our next analysis, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Ah!
okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. Earlier in our show tonight, we reported on rising gun ownership across the United States. In one of our previous shows, we discussed the issue of gun control in detail. We're bringing you the same insightful conversation once again on Muslim Network News. Let's watch.
Thank you, Hena Zuberi. This is Dr. Amin Al-Din, and I have the honor, the absolute honor, to talk with Dr. Spitzer, who is a presidential scholar. He is a constitutional scholar, and he is an expert in the field of all of this stuff we're talking about on gun violence. He's also masquerading as a political scientist. Thank you for being with us. This is such an honor, I can't say. You know, gun violence is just the topic of the day. And everybody is talking about how do we get the guns out of the hands of civilians. And the president, again, another president, has come up with a way. I'm not too sure about any of those ways. So I'm going to have to listen to you.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be with you. President Biden, sort of drawing in the subject of gun policy and looking at the presidency, I guess my first point is that President Biden is facing a pretty delicate political balancing act right now because the Democrats have very narrow majorities in both houses of Congress, and he has a lot he wants to get done, some huge policy items, and then add into that the gun issue, which he did campaign on, and his campaign platform was a lengthy list of new gun proposals that he wanted to see enacted if elected president. But what he's doing right now is he's taking some initial unilateral steps, that is enacting or going to enact some executive orders on the gun issue, because he can do those on his own. They don't have to go to Congress. The only limitation is that because they are executive orders, they only pertain to departments of the executive branch. And that's why you can only go so far in that direction to change policy if you're the president. But what he's proposed, I think, are perfectly sensible and good things to do. They're not far-reaching, you might say, but I would say that heading the list is a proposal to reclassify what are called ghost guns. Right now, average people can purchase gun parts, assemble them at home pretty easily, and these parts have no serial numbers on them. And as a consequence, they're untraceable. And that is a significant problem. In 2019, roughly 10,000 ghost guns were retrieved from crime scenes. And here we are 2 years later. I have no doubt that that number is significantly greater than it was 2 years ago.
Is the ghost gun like the guns they can make on the 3D kind of replicators? Because those don't have serial numbers either, right?
That is right. It is possible to do metallic kind of 3D construction work with what you think of as 3D printers, but those kinds of guns that you think about being constructed with a 3D printers in recent years are made of polymers. And the problem with them is that they're virtually one-shot guns. That is, they can't withstand the force of numerous firings made from these polymers. So the more immediate and bigger threat is guns made from metal, and you can get those in the mail. That's the thing.
And make these, you can make a pistol, but you can also get something that they were calling a brace and turn it, it steadies your aim and allows you to do much more damage. But I want to push back a little bit on what many of us consider reasonable gun policy efforts, and ask, is that going to do it? Or do we have to have 6 more policy efforts or something? Because you can make it harder to get ghost guns. You can raise red flags. You can do all of these things. But is that going to change what has become an American mindset? I'm uncomfortable. I go out and I shoot up the mall. My girlfriend left me, and I go and shoot up something else.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the totality of crime, 40,000 people die from guns in America every year. It's important to point out, by the way, that twice as many of those deaths are gun suicides as are gun homicides.
Isn't it horrible?
Yeah, and this is a good example where uniform policy could have a big effect. That is, if you require people to lock up their guns. It's such a simple thing. And even today, there is no advertising campaign. I mean, why doesn't something the National Rifle Association could do, right? The gun rights group. Where are there multi-million-dollar advertising campaigns on TV advising people, if you own a gun, make sure you lock it up? They advise people to do that, but there's no public service initiative. That's something that could be done with no government regulation. You could require locks. You could make sure that locks are sold with every gun. You could take more steps in those directions.
With the registration, you could require the locks. You teach at SUNY Cortland. And I want to, in your classes, when you're explaining, I don't know, I'm assuming that this comes up because of all the shootings, what legislation do you think about and talk to your students about that it's very pragmatic? Because what you're talking about is very practical.
Yeah. There are many practical things that could be done. Obviously, some of them would involve the government. But when you think about something like mass shootings, it tends to be a different sort of problem than, and I hate to say it this way, but than the typical shooting. Even though mass shootings receive a huge amount of attention, and for understandable reasons, they amount to about 1% of annual gun deaths. So that means there's 99% in a category other than mass shootings. But there's increasing research on mass shootings and shooters. Who are these people? Why do they do what they do? What could be done to stave off mass shootings? And that's where something like red flag laws come into play. And indeed, a number of mass shooters have been stopped because, somebody called the police, somebody took us, went to school, told a principal, a friend told authorities. There are ways that you can bring those numbers down. But all of this has many causes. It's going to take time. And there are roughly 300 million guns in America, so the guns are not going away.
Well, could you, for our audience, go back and explain what the red flag, I think that's what Biden is going to make an executive order. I don't know how far executive orders go into states and whether states have to comply or not.
Well, the answer in this case would be no. What the Biden administration wants to do is draft a model red flag law that other states can adopt. It's a state-by-state decision. There is legislation in Congress to adopt a federal red flag law, but there again, you're facing Congress with very narrow majorities, especially in the Senate where the division is 50-50 with the tie-breaking vote cast by the vice president. And the idea, though, is that given that 20 states, including some conservative states, have adopted red flag laws, that the federal government can at least encourage other states to do the same thing, and they can model on the federal template that the Biden administration wants to create. So here again, it's a small step. If they can get more states to adopt them, that would be a good thing. There have been studies of red flag laws, and they help, especially in preventing suicides. Again, less attention in the press, but a very important area where more can and perhaps is being done.
Well, I think also many of us, when I took constitutional law, I thought I was very clear on what the Second Amendment says. Now I'm not so clear anymore because it's being used to whip people all over the place. Can you tell us a little bit about the Second Amendment that will help give some clarity to what's going on?
Yeah, there's a difference between the historical understanding of the Second Amendment and the way it's been reinterpreted for contemporary law. The Second Amendment says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Historically, it was clear what that meant. It meant that citizens had a right to own a gun for service in a government organized and regulated militia. That's it. And that's what the people who wrote the amendment said. That's how the courts had treated it for nearly 200 years. Then in 2008, along comes a more conservative Supreme Court, and they changed course, and they announced that they believe now this amendment, or the interpretation is, it now provides for a personal right of the average citizen to own a handgun for personal self-protection in the home. But even in that, you know, that is an ahistorical reading, as virtually any reputable historian would tell you, and indeed said at the time. But even in that decision, they listed extensively the kinds of laws that would be allowable under that rubric. And basically what it amounts to is pretty much every law that is on the books and that is being debated now would be fine under that rubric. But the final step is that we now have a very, very much more conservative court, even than we had in 2008. And I'm firmly convinced that there is a 5 or even 6 member majority that's prepared to start rolling back existing gun laws that have previously withstood legal challenge and even blocking new laws that could be beneficial. And if that happens, and I just think it's going to happen sooner or later, that is going to really, you know, gum up the idea of trying to address the gun problem through public policy. That's a prediction for the future. But I think that's kind of where we stand.
But when the Supreme Court gets to interpret, okay, but can it interpret so far away from the intention of what's actually there so that it causes harm to society? We could be, and we are obviously, a gun-toting society where civilians are shooting other civilians on the street and en masse at will.
Yes, and the Supreme Court obviously can interpret the law as it sees fit. They are the final authority, although the Constitution can be amended to change court doctrine. Even the regular legislative process in the past has been used to alter constitutional meaning and the direction of constitutional law. So the other branches of government can and do participate in that process. So there are, you know, it's not necessarily the end of the story by any means, but in fact, the court has been heavily criticized, and rightly so, for claiming that they're doing originalist interpretation, what the founders meant, when in fact it really is the opposite of what the founders meant. And I would just add one point, which is I've done a lot of research on old gun laws. And the fact is that in our history, gun ownership is as old as America, but so are gun laws. And in our first 300 years, in many respects, guns were more strictly regulated than they have been in the last 30 years. And that's a story that too few people know.
Keep talking. I want to know more about what you're thinking here. You've got a minute. It's all yours.
Well, you're very kind. When you looking at these old gun laws, in fact, it's work I've been doing very recently, and I have been shocked at the wide range and variety and strictness of old gun laws. And I mean going back to the 1600s. We've seen demonstrations, you know, in the last year where people bring guns to the state capitol because they want to make a statement. Right. And there were laws as early as the 1600s that barred citizens from gathering in groups more than 10 with guns. And if they didn't disperse in the space of a half an hour or an hour, they were subject to arrest. That was in the 1600s. And the reason why is the same reason today, because it scares people. And that has always been true in American law. And it's just one of many areas where we need to pay more attention to what our real past is.
Well, Professor Spitzer, we have learned a lot in a really small amount of time. So we'll have to get back to you because I know you're writing furiously. And thank you so much for being on Muslim Network TV.
I enjoyed speaking with you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amina. So much to think about. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in to our segment. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube channel or our Facebook page. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.